Well, Minnesota gave Penn State an upset scare, so surely Maryland can... Stop right there. This game is personal for James Franklin for obvious reasons, and the Terrapins are going to find out really quickly why Tyler Warren is in the Heisman conversation.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place just a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. This is the prediction and preview episode for the final regular season game, Penn State versus Maryland. For anybody that is new here, I will give you my score prediction first, and then my reasoning and some other analysis to go along with it, and all the game info that you need here in this show. Let me know your prediction down in the comments section. Your final score for Penn State versus Maryland. I am going to go with Penn State 42, Maryland 17. Penn State handles a Maryland team at home that's just not as good as them. And I'll give you my reasoning here as promised. Penn State should be able to move the football against this Maryland defense. And for what it's worth, the game was close, but Penn State's offense did pretty well against a top 20 Minnesota defense. Well, this Maryland defense is not the same caliber. I will give them credit, though. They're actually pretty decent against the run, but when it comes to throwing the football, defending against the pass, Maryland is not good at that. They are 90th in the country in terms of yards per completion, so what that tells me is they give up the big explosive play. Well, Andy Kotelnicki's bread and butter. What does he like to do? Dial up the explosive play. So Penn State should be able to move the ball through the air effectively. Maryland's pass defense allowing the big plays. I look to Amari Evans to have a big game. And of course, Tyler Warren. And if Julian Fleming's available, right, we'll talk about injuries later in the show. Just some of the other senior players getting involved offensively here. But when I think of big plays in this case, I think Amari Evans and I think Tyler Warren are the go-to for Penn State. And Penn State also needs its offense to be on their A game. I expect Penn State to start fast, put up at least 21 or more points in the first half, and really jump out to a lead against, it could be 21-7 at half against Maryland, hypothetically. Reason number two here, we'll flip it over to Maryland and actually look at this team. Billy Edwards is banged up and has been struggling at quarterback for most of the season, but really as of late. Now, I thought Edwards would be an above average player, somebody who's gritty because he's a veteran, he has dual threat ability, he's just a go-to player in this offense for Maryland, whether it's through the air or on the ground. And injuries, poor decision-making have really held him back. 9 interceptions this season. That's almost double what Drew Aller's thrown this season. And he's banged up. He has a thumb injury, so that's probably not helping him here. But when they turn to Ed, they would rather go with a banged-up Billy Edwards than the backup quarterback, MJ Morris, who just hasn't been any better when he's come in relief. So they would rather go with Edwards, the veteran, than a healthy Morris. And then let's segue that into the next reason here. Penn State's defense will be able to force multiple turnovers, and this is something they have not done. They have not done that. They've had big plays in moments. Zion Tracy, the pick six against Ohio State, didn't matter because it didn't translate to a victory. You did have Jalen Reed's interception against which team, right? Wisconsin, Washington. So Penn State selectively forces a big turnover that builds momentum, but they haven't gotten to an instance where they'll have 2, 3, 4 consistently. And I know that's easier said than done, but it's just kind of one interception here, one interception there. This is a game where Penn State's defense should be able to force multiple turnovers. That could be anybody from Jalen Reed to Zachy Wheatley. Dom DeLuca had an interception recently against Minnesota. So it's always that one key interception. James Franklin has even emphasized this, saying that as a defense, we need to force more interceptions, but we also need to force more fumbles. Penn State defense is not forcing enough fumbles and getting opposing offenses to cough up the football here. Edwards is turnover prone, 9 interceptions on the season. So I could see possibly 2 from the Penn State defense and maybe even a fumble in this case, since Franklin has been emphasizing it. And because of the matchup, Tom Allen will dial up, I think, some more pressure here because, frankly, he's been really conservative when he dials up that pressure. It's certainly far from what Manny Diaz did as a defensive coordinator, but Manny Diaz is in a category of his own when it comes to dialing up pressure. My point being is that you don't have to when you have Abdul Carter and Zane Durant and Denai Dennis Sutton and Devon J. Thomas who can get pressure organically, but that doesn't happen all the time. So I think in this matchup, where Maryland has one offensive weapon that they really like to go to in Ty Felton, if you're able to double him, shadow him with A.J. Harris, and then dial up, use some more resources towards pressuring Billy Edwards, and this is a game where Penn State, I would like to see them force 3 turnovers, maybe even 4. I think 2 is definitely a realistic possibility here. We'll go to the X factor of this game, talk about X factors a little more and keys to the game in the second segment. But Penn State has Tyler Warren and Maryland does not. There will be an emphasis to get him the football. He's firmly in the Heisman conversation. Am I saying that he's going to win? I want to remain fairly objective here, even though this is a Penn State podcast. But in Tyler Warren's case, we've seen Penn State and James Franklin do this before, where if somebody has a Heisman opportunity, i.e. Saquon Barkley, they will do everything to get him the football, whether that's throwing it, kick returns, right? In the case of Barkley, but now with Tyler Warren, he's snapping the football, he's throwing the football, he's running it. Tyler Warren in this game could have 2-3 touchdowns himself. I fully expect another heavy dose, 10 receptions, 100 yards at least, a touchdown through the air, a touchdown on the ground, maybe even throws for a touchdown when they get into the red zone. Given Maryland's leaky pass defense, this is very much a possibility here. Warren will have the kitchen sink at his disposal to get him a trip to New York for the Heisman ceremony. Do I think he wins it? Probably not. Ashton Genty exists, and I don't think he should be the favorite, but Travis Hunter also exists too. So it is pretty stiff competition here. But Tyler Warren, that would be massive for Penn State just to get a tight end an invite to the Heisman ceremony. I am predicting Tyler Warren to have at least 3 touchdowns where he's responsible for. Whether that's 3 receiving, 2 rushing, 1 receiving, he throws for 1, at least 3. He'll have a hat trick in this game. Final reasoning here, kind of a final A and a final B in this instance. Penn State has everything to play for and Maryland has nothing to play for. Now, you can look at it from the other perspective too, because that was certainly the case a week ago. Penn State has a playoff game to play for, at least a playoff berth. They're protecting something, and it felt like they were playing that way too. And Minnesota had the bull in the china shop mentality. I've said that before about teams that they can just go in, mess things up, and certainly Minnesota played that way. But I don't know that argument necessarily applies, that Maryland will play loose and Penn State will play conservative here, because now Maryland truly has nothing to play for except spoiler. There's no bowl game on the line. There's discourse around Mike Locksley, if he has the team bought in, if he should even be the coach next season. So maybe there is that element to play for here. But for Penn State, they need another game on the resume where they really beat up on an opponent, especially an inferior opponent here, because there's talks about how, Notre Dame should jump them in the college football playoff rankings, or Penn State still doesn't have that good of a strength of schedule. Well, it's kind of like Washington all over again. Use this game as another part of your resume to put yourself back into the college football playoff conversation that, Penn State, because that's Indiana dominates all of its competition that they played to this point. Well, Penn State can do the same in this case too, because they still need another statement victory. Now, the final part of this. For James Franklin, it is still personal. It is still personal. Even a decade later, after he coached at Vanderbilt, and now that he's been the coach at Penn State for 11 years, Penn State, or Maryland, I should say, in James Franklin's case, this is still personal because he pointed this out at the beginning of his press conference. Did anybody catch that? I definitely did. That he had a little bit of a slight, I know Maryland very well. I'm familiar with them. And he could have stopped there. But he said, I was an assistant coach there for a while. I was the head coach in waiting. This game means something. James Franklin playing against Maryland means something to James more than Mike Locksley coaching against Penn State means to Mike Locksley. I hope people are understanding my point here, is that James Franklin is not afraid to put his best game plan together just to stick it to Maryland another time every single season. So aside from the 2020 game and the first time they played each other when Franklin was the head coach, Maryland has not had any success against this Franklin-led Penn State program, and Franklin's going to make sure it stays that way. We'll talk more about keys to the game, things to watch specifically for offensively and defensively from Penn State, as well as Maryland's keys to victory. If they're going to try to play spoiler, what can they do to try to upset the Nittany Lions? We'll talk about that more after a word from our sponsors. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and you will get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And let's head over to FanDuel and look at the lines for Penn State versus Maryland. Penn State is a 24.5 point favorite on the spread. They are minus 4,000 on the money line. Maryland is plus 1,400 on the money line, and the total is set at 50.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And today's episode is also brought to you by Team Ticker. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign for college sports fans. And if you're watching this episode, that right there to my left is a Team Ticker sign. But I'm going to describe it for the listeners as well. It's a combination, design, and function that gives you an entertaining, creative way to display your team pride while providing a unique connection to your favorite team. So whether it is football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, soccer, or softball, Team Ticker has got you covered. You'll never miss a game again, as the high-tech retro display provides a countdown to the next big game, as well as daily updates on the latest team news, stats, schedules, standings, and much more. Team Ticker is the ultimate addition to your Nittany Lions sports collection, and once you hang it on the wall, it's going to be the talk of all your fellow Penn State fans. If you're looking for that one eye-catching item to showcase your team pride or a gift for that special Nittany Lions fan, go to teamticker.com and pick up your Team Ticker today. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign, and right now, they are running a $50 off holiday sale. Go to teamticker.com to take advantage of this holiday sale now and get $50 off your Team Ticker purchase. Again, that is teamticker.com. So things to watch for when it comes to Penn State, of course, keys to victory here as well and key matchups. When I look at Penn State offensively, you just lost Anthony Donko, so Nolan Rucci immediately comes to mind. The ground game also struggled against Minnesota, and frankly has not been that good all season long. So Penn State, as good as the aerial attack may be against a Maryland pass defense that just gives up the big play, I'm watching for Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton in this case. Now, Singleton had a pretty decent game. James Franklin and myself are seeing it through the eye test that Singleton does look closer to 100% that he has all season long. So at least he's getting back to his true form, right? But the ground game still is not where it needs to be. Andy Kotelnicki is a ground and pound first offensive coordinator. That's what he would prefer to do, but he has also said that he will do whatever is necessary. If that's running the ball 50, 60 times, if that's throwing the ball 50, 60 times, whatever it takes to get a win. But something's got to get the ground game going. Quentin Martin, maybe he's back into the fold here, right? Just anything to kind of give a spark plug to the ground game. If that's just somebody else, because Katron Allen, he has not put his best performances together recently. Purdue, and then this Minnesota game most recently. Maybe a Corey Smith or a Quentin Martin, just as, I don't want to say a change of pace because they're all fair. I know Katron Allen is the power back, if you will, compared to Nicholas Singleton, who is the speedster, even though Singleton does way more here. But just to try to get somebody else in the fold, you don't have those redshirt concerns anymore. Quentin Martin, he missed some time in the middle of the season, but it looks like he is back. And then there was that redshirt concern. You don't have that issue anymore. So just to kind of get a different rhythm from the ground game, I think by any means necessary, and experience across the board. Back to Nolan Rucci. Anthony Donko was improving week in and week out. And Nolan Rucci is sound in run blocking. Best asset of Nolan Rucci's game is his run blocking. But what I'm looking for is, how is he in pass protection? So we talk about these big explosive plays in the passing game. Tyler Warren, Trey Wallace, Amari Evans. Okay, they could have a big day, right? He needs time. Drew Aller needs time in the pocket. And Nolan Rucci is going to be up to probably not the biggest challenge here. That's going to come in the college football playoff against at whoever Penn State could play in the first round, and if they win, getting to that quarterfinal, and if all things go well, semifinal and so on, right? But my point is that it's an advantageous matchup for Nolan Rucci, but it's still a good place for him. And part of the reason why Maryland gives up the explosive plays is because the secondary cannot cover forever. The defensive line, the defensive front, they run a 4-3, which we will talk about a little more in the final segment. They do not get a lot of pressure. They on the season, 14 sacks in total. That is barely a sack per game. So Maryland's defense doesn't exactly get pressure. And Penn State's offensive line would win this matchup, hypothetically. But that's what I'm looking for in particular, is Nolan Rucci, and then getting some confidence in the ground game going into this period here where you have 3 weeks to prepare for your playoff opponent. But the offense should be able to go through the air, as I've mentioned. You have Tyler Warren, you have Amari Evans, and don't forget about a Trey Wallace. And then, is this the game where we finally see Tyseer Denmark? Maybe, depending on the availability of Julian Fleming, but I guess I'm going to err on the side of not unlikely, just because he had some opportunities against Purdue. Minnesota was obviously a very close game. It's probably going to be later in the game, but I really would like to see a Tyseer Denmark involved in the passing game. Let's move to defensively for Penn State. Things to watch for, keys to victory. Tackling is an issue 11 games into the season, and hopefully not a 12th. Maryland isn't an overly dominant physical team. I would argue that they are a run-first team. I respect Roman Hemby. He is the guy. And I think Billy Edwards can do some things as a dual-threat quarterback. But they're not a physical team. They are not a physical team. They would like to run the ball first. That's what we've seen traditionally out of Mike Locksley teams. But why they throw so much more is because they're usually playing from behind. So They are not playing a lot of games with the lead, but their preference is to run the football. Still, you got to be able to tackle the opposing ball carrier. Minnesota, okay, granted, they're physical, and Darius Taylor is as talented as they get. He's one of the best running backs in the Big Ten. But Penn State's tackling issues extended past just trying to bring down Darius Taylor. Certainly he was difficult, but Penn State just arm tackles and then just pure broken tackles where the opposing ball carrier was just more physical on that play. Bad angles to the football. These are things that need to be worked on. I would emphasize it down the stretch here. Now, I'm not saying have Oklahoma drills for the next 3-4 weeks because you're dealing with those injuries. But you have to be sure. That's how Maryland can continue to build confidence. The stiff arm, a broken tackle, 2nd and 11 as opposed to 2nd and 4 or 5. Those extra bits of yards matter, and it's why Minnesota was able to extend drives, and it looked pretty competent offensively when they haven't all season. Maryland's not a physical team. I don't think tackling will be as an apparent of an issue this time around, but you never know in this case. Also defensively, how do you offset the loss of an Alonzo Ford and an Elliott Washington? Maybe Elliott Washington is back this game. But my point is that on defense, that's where the bigger concern lies. I don't have too many concerns about the offense. I have things that I would like to see. But tackling and the way that Minnesota was able to move the football efficiently against Penn State's defense, there's a reason James Franklin didn't put Penn State's defense back out there and why he would rather fake a punt at his own 30-yard line than punt the football back and say, okay, defense, go out there and stop Minnesota's offense. This wasn't Oregon's offense or Ohio State's offense. This was Minnesota's offense that he was saying, I don't know that I trust my Penn State defense at this given time. So that's where the concern lies. And then you lose an Alonzo Ford. You don't have as much depth in the secondary. And I know they've had such a time to adjust to KJ Winston without KJ Winston, but still it's starting to mount here. So our guys like Ty Blanding and Xavier Gilliam, will we see them more in the defensive interior, right? How is the depth going to turn out? Is the depth going to be more capable here on Penn State's defense? Because then the starters aren't playing at 100% if you don't have the quality depth behind them. And then everybody loses out. Everybody loses out in this case. Your starters aren't playing to the best of their capabilities, and then the depth isn't playing complementary as well. So that's what I'm looking for defensively. Overall, I would like to see Penn State's depth get in this game. Whether that, I've named them, Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, Tyser Denmark. Defensively, I would like to see some of the other backups as well. Xavier Gilliam, Ty Blanding on the defensive line. See if you can get Anthony Specca into the game at linebacker. Dejon Lane some more valuable reps at the safety spot. You're going to need all those players to be as close to game ready as possible because the playoffs are approaching. Maryland's keys to victory, I've kind of alluded to them throughout this podcast here, but specifically, don't turn the ball over. If you're Maryland, you've had some turnover issues. Try to keep Billy Edwards as upright as possible. They've also allowed 20 sacks on the season, and Penn State's defense might not have to blitz in this case. I think they will. I've talked about that. I think they will use that matchup to their advantage. But they don't have to. I think they can still get organic pressure with just Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, as it is, and Devon J. Thomas as well. So Maryland's keys are simply offensively, because that's how you beat Penn State right now. Since the defense isn't as strong as it should be or as it could be, you can try to get into a shootout with Penn State. I'm not saying that's how Maryland's going to win. Or I guess I am in this case, right? Because this is the keys to a hypothetical victory. So it's not turn the football over. It's protect the quarterback, give him time. Do what Minnesota did, because they put the blueprint out there on how to beat Penn State. Use the running game, Roman Hemby, to offset everything, and then get your quarterback into rhythm, make the pre-snap checks at the line of scrimmage, and see if you can give him time to find an open receiver. Because A.J. Harris did not do all that well against a Daniel Jackson. Ty Felton and Caden Prather are a pretty good dynamic duo at wide receiver. I am intrigued by that matchup since Harris did not have his best game. Felton or Prather, who is he covering? Both of those are very competent receivers. And again, if Edwards has time to throw, eventually he is going to find somebody, and clearly Ty Felton has been that in the passing game and more. Defensively, if you can force turnovers, there's really not much Maryland can do, right? I think they're going to have their hands full with stopping a Penn State offense. It is not going to be good for them. So you can expect some points in this game. You really can. Key matchups in this game across the board. I've already mentioned it. Ty Felton against A.J. Harris. Penn State's defensive line against Maryland's offensive line. I would say Billy Edwards against Penn State's secondary. The things that are most likely here, those are the biggest matchups that are going to have an impact on this game. Maryland's defensive game plan against Tyler Warren. Again, Tyler Warren will get as many reps as he can to help boost his Heisman campaign. We'll talk more about specific game plans, what to expect schematically from Penn State and Maryland, and then game info and injuries you need to know that will impact the game. I'll tell you more on the other side of this break. I really think Penn State's offense is going to pass a lot. Maryland's pass defense is one of the worst in the country. They're barely top 100 in terms of yards per completion. Again, so that means they allow the big play, but in terms of overall passing yards per game. And since Penn State's running game has not been there as of late or been as consistent as you would like, I think that's what Penn State can lean on here. Drew Aller is playing his best football. You have Tyler Warren. So expect Penn State to pass the football a little more until they really increase that lead, and then they'll run the football to close out the game with Nicholas Singleton. Now, I do want to address that. I don't know that I'm expecting, at least not right now, a 50-50 workload between Singleton and Allen. I'm not exactly sure what prompted that change, but it looks like it's trending where Singleton is getting 70% of the reps and Allen's getting, or in terms of touches, carries, catches, it seems like Singleton's getting about 70-75% in Katron Allen. So that work share has gone from 50-50 and really favoring Singleton now that he's healthier. Penn State will do what it does traditionally. Andy Kotelnicki, a lot of pre-snap movement. As we know, guys will come in motion. Offensive lineman Vanga Ioane will come from the slot, and pretty much the same old. I am intrigued to see Julian Fleming, if he is available or not. That is going to dictate whether Penn State runs the football more. And if he's not available, they're honestly going to air it out a good bit. Even more so because Julian Fleming is essentially an extra tight end with the way that he blocks. He's very good on the boundary at setting the edge, and he does open up the passing game too. I don't think people give enough credit to Julian Fleming, despite him not showing up in the box score. We know that Penn State runs the 4-2-5. We all know that very well here on the show as a Nittany Lions fan. But for any Maryland viewers and listeners, right, I want to give them just as much info as I can. 4-2-5, Tom Allen does not blitz a whole lot, but he might more so in this game. From what we know about Maryland, they run more so a pro-style offense. They'll run a 4-3 defensively, as I mentioned. But this is an offense that's going to rely on Roman Hemby. If they can get the ground game going, or at least to offset some of Penn State's pressure, they'll go with Roman Hemby. Nolan Ray will get some carries as well. And Billy Edwards, I don't know how much they're going to put him in harm's way, but he's the second leading carrier in terms of volume. He has 81 carries on the season for being the quarterback. So Edwards' usage is very high in this Maryland offense, but he's not 100%, so we'll see if they just try to protect him and get him to play a full 4 quarters here in this case. But on the receiving end, they're going to rely heavily on Ty Felton, Caden Prather. Those guys want nice 1-2 punch in the receiving game. A lot of teams would like to have that duo. I will say that much, but Edwards relies, this Maryland offense relies significantly on them. As I mentioned, a 4-3, not so much an attacking defense, but they do emphasize on stopping the run here for Maryland's defense. They don't force too many turnovers. The problem with Maryland's defense is that they do get some interceptions, right? Credit to Jalen Husky and Glendon Miller, who have 3 interceptions apiece. A lot of passes defended, so they're getting their hands on the football, but they are not completing the play. They're not following through. They are not making the interception in that case. So it's a 4-3 defense that has a lot to be concerned about, with the fact that run defense, respectable. Give them credit. Pass defense, not so much. Not so. And then eventually the run defense is going to bend, and eventually break, because the Penn State's going to have the lead and be able to run the football more. For anybody that doesn't know, this game is at 3:30 Eastern time and will kick off on CBS. CBS has the coverage. And this is a game, just be aware of the weather. If you are going, bundle up, especially when nighttime sets in as it goes into the evening. It is going to be chilly. It is probably going to be in the low 30s to start and then drop down into the upper 20s as the game progresses. There are going to be some winds. It looks like about 10 to 15 mile an hour winds. So a little windy. No precipitation is expected, so no rain. And that's all. That's at least something positive here, but it is going to be cold. And as nighttime, as the evening sets in, it could get really chilly here. Penn State's injuries, there are a lot of them at this point now that we know about Penn State. Maryland is healthier in this case, but when you look at the injury report, Julian Fleming is going to be questionable. You can still, I would say, Keon Wiley and Caden Saunders, they're progressing to get back to the playoffs. I think that's what their plan is. I don't expect them. KJ Winston, you can presume that he's out for the season. Elliott Washington, is he back this game? He would be questionable as well. We know about Andrew Rapplier, the tight end, Cam Wallace, one of the backup running backs. They would be out indefinitely as well, alongside KJ Winston there in that spot. And Alonzo Ford can be added to this as well. And Anthony Donko, they are out long term. They will not play in this game and are presumably out for the season. Colby McDonald was somebody that Maryland was going to rely on this season as a backup running back, someone that could rotate in with Roman Hemby. He is out for the season. Dylan Gooden, a linebacker, is out for the season. Levon Johnson, defensive lineman, looks to be questionable. Mekhi White, wide receiver, is questionable. And Dimitri Nicholas, another defensive lineman, looks to be out for the season as well. And don't forget, Billy Edwards is dealing with that thumb injury. So those are all the injuries that will have somewhat of an impact on this game. Again, the spread is Penn State 24.5-point favorites against Maryland, final game of the season. If you got a score prediction, let me know down in the comments section. As Penn State does need another statement victory, because I feel like whether it's the College Football Playoff Committee respects Penn State, which is what matters most, but to kind of just a nice little reiteration to the national pundits that Penn State is not overrated. They are not overrated. They are right where they should be, and another statement victory would do them justice against Maryland, and it is personal for James Franklin. It is personal for James Franklin. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. I really appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this show. Again, leave your score predictions and your expectations for this game down in the comments section. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like on this show. Subscribe if you're not already. Become an everydayer. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and be an everydayer, because we are cranking out Penn State football, men's basketball, and wrestling content on this show each and every day. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, and everyone have a happy Thanksgiving. And thanks again for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions and making us your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, check out Locked On Big Ten with host Craig Sheeman. Craig puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it, and frankly, with all this football playoff discourse, it seems that way, doesn't it? You can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.